Nikkud. It's the system of vowels and pronunciation marks, and it's the last thing you need to know to read Hebrew. So, kadima. This is part 2 of the Nikkud video. If you don't already know the vowel points, you should watch part 1 first, and it's already up. This video covers dagesh, the dot that distinguishes shin from sin, and punctuation. All right, now you know all of the vowel sounds, and it's time to talk about the dot in the middle, which is called dagesh. So a dagesh is always a dot in the middle of the letter, and we sometimes say that it's in the belly or the bosom of the letter. Sometimes a letter it has no middle, and so it'll come just to the left of it. In biblical Hebrew, there are 2 different forms of the dagesh. There is the dagesh lene, or the weak dagesh, the hardening dagesh. And those 3 phrases are all 3 different phrases, 3 different names of the same dagesh. This dagesh hardens the sound of the letter. In linguistic terms, we would say that this dagesh makes the letter a stop or a plosive. And what that means is that we completely obstruct the airflow from our lungs, and then we let it out all at once. So with the dagesh, these 3 letters sound like b or pa or pa. So you can hear that there's like a little stop, there's no sound at all, and then boom, all of a sudden there's like a little explosion of sound. So basically it's just the B sound, the K sound, or the P sound. Without the dagesh, these sound like a fricative, which is a sound where the airflow is almost blocked off, but not completely. And so you can hear the sound of the friction as the air is trying to squeeze by that small opening in your mouth. So without the dagesh, these sound like basically a V as in Victor, the ch sound like at the end of the word Tanakh, or an F sound as in Frank. And the dagesh lene can actually be on any of these letters. And one can imagine a fricative version of a gimel, a dalet, and a taf, something more like z and th and th. But nothing like that ever happens in modern Hebrew. Sometimes if you're reading with Nikkud, you'll see these letters with a dagesh and you think, wow, is that pronounced differently? And no, the answer is no. They sound exactly the same in modern Hebrew, with or without the dagesh. They sound like g, k, and t. The one major exception is that in the Ashkenazi dialect, a taf without a dagesh sounds like an S, as in snake, right? This is why sometimes you'll hear, you can always tell an Ashkenazi by the way they say the word emet. Speakers of the Sephardi accent will say emet, and Ashkenazis will say that same word emes, because it does not have a dagesh at the end, in that taf at the end. So the other dagesh, which looks exactly the same, is called the dagesh forte, or the strong dagesh, or the doubling dagesh. And the main difference is that it can be applied to a bigger group of letters. It basically can apply to any letter except a guttural. And remember, the gutturals are aleph, he, chet, ayin, and resh. And they're all the sounds that are articulated in the throat rather than in the mouth area. So those never have any kind of dagesh. And this doubling dagesh does what it says. It doubles the sound of the letter. And this has all kinds of implications for syllables and also vowel sounds and other stuff in biblical Hebrew. But there's no doubling in modern Hebrew. And in all my 50 years of learning Hebrew, I never needed to count syllables or talk about syllables. I didn't even know the word for syllable until last year. And so if you're reading modern Hebrew with Nikkud, you will see dagesh all over the place. And you can just ignore it unless you see it in a bet, a cup, or a pay, and then you know what to do. Now, let's take a look at this letter. This may or may not have been problematic in Masoretic times when the Vav was probably pronounced more like a W. But considering how important syllables are in analyzing the Tanakh, it seems really odd to me that the Masoretes would mark a Vav with a Dagesh and a Shuruk exactly the same way. But it's actually not as bad as it looks. Texts are either written with Nikkud or not. And so they usually don't go half and half. So when you see this letter and you're wondering, is this a double V sound or is this an U sound? All you have to do is look at the letter before it. Does that letter have a vowel? If so, then this is a Vav with a doubling Dagesh. And that doubling dagesh doesn't mean anything to modern Hebrew learners. We still just pronounce it like a V. If the previous letter has no vowel, then this is the vowel. And so it's a shuruk and it sounds like U. So let's look at this word. How on earth are we supposed to pronounce it? We take it one letter at a time. So we have a kaf with a dagesh, which is going to sound like k. And then we have a chirik vowel, so that's going to sound like ki. And since the kaf has that chirik vowel, we know that this first vav must be a consonant. So if you're trying to speak modern Hebrew, it'll be a V sound. And if you are trying to pronounce it the biblical way, it'll be a doubled W, however you want to try to pronounce that. But let's look at this second Vav with the dot in the belly. Is that also a doubled Vav for another double V sound in modern Hebrew? No, it cannot be, because if it is, then that first Vav has no vowel. Only final letters are allowed to have no vowel. So this second Vav must be a shuruk. And then we have the final nun. So we have ki, v, u, m, kivun. And this means direction, like the place you want to go, either physically or spiritually. Thankfully, this is just one ambiguous letter, and we usually don't need to think this hard when we're reading Hebrew. But if you see a difficult word, just slow down, take it letter by letter, nikuda by nikuda. You can do it. So this last set of Nikkud marks that I will talk about is the dot that goes over the shin and the sin. I have tried to discover the Hebrew name for this dot. I find it very difficult to believe that they did not name this dot. But I have come up empty-handed. Wikipedia doesn't know. My Israeli friends don't know. Nobody seems to know. It just doesn't have a common name. They call it the shin dot or the sin dot. And so, as I mentioned in the Aleph Bet video, this letter sometimes sounds like sh and sometimes like an S. It's almost like they are two completely different letters. But they are treated as one letter in the letter count. They always say Hebrew has 22 letters, and if you counted these separately, it would be 23. And of course, before the Masoretes, there were no Nikkud, so these did look exactly the same in biblical times. But basically, the dot on the right tells you that this is pronounced sheen, like an sh, like you're shushing somebody. And with the dot on the left, the letter is seen, and it's pronounced just like an S. Oh, one last phenomenon I want to talk about is the double duty dot. When there is a cholam next to a shin or a sin, and it's on the same side as that shin dot or sin dot, you have the option to write it only once. And when you do, it's called the double duty dot. So let's look at this word choshech, which means darkness. And you can see that there's only one dot between the chet and the shin. Because we're writing with Nikkud, we know that that chet has to have a vowel, and there's no other vowel. So that dot up top has to be the cholam that goes with that chet. But that second letter also needs a dot. And so since there's not a dot on the left, you know that that dot on the right also is making that a sheen as opposed to a seen. But this is not mandatory. And we can see that in the word on the bottom that they chose to write 2 dots. And that one came from my Hebrew English Tanakh. And the little mark under the chet is some kind of accent or cantillation mark. I'm not sure what it is, but it is definitely not a vowel. All right, so that brings us to the end of the Nikkud that are used in biblical texts and children's books and beginners materials. But there are a couple of other symbols and writing conventions that need to be mentioned. Firstly, Hebrew has an apostrophe called a geresh in Hebrew, but it is not used like the English apostrophe. One of its uses is to indicate sounds that Hebrew does not have, and one such sound is the J sound. If somebody is writing in Hebrew and they want to indicate that sound because it's a foreign word, then what they do is they write a gimel with a geresh right after it. The geresh and the letter yod can kind of look a lot alike, and this causes people to confuse them often and write the wrong symbol. My good friend and Hebrew teacher Dee demonstrated the difference between the yod and the geresh using the Hebrew word for the American state of Georgia, where I happen to be right now. The country of Georgia has a different pronunciation and a different spelling. This is only for the American state or a person's name if there's somebody named Georgia. So in Hebrew, they pronounce Georgia just like an English speaker does, with 2 J sounds. And this is the perfect word to show the difference between the geresh and the yod, because at the end of the word, you can see there is a geresh right next to the yod. And I'm showing this here in 4 different fonts so that you can see it. Usually the geresh sticks up a tiny bit above the top line of writing. And whereas the top of the yod is in line with the top of the other letters. Also, the yod is usually quite curvy or bent, whereas the geresh is more straight, even if it is sometimes a little slanted. But you can see that in this font here, the geresh does not stick up above the top line. And in this font, which I took from my cell phone, neither one is curvy. They're both small, a small straight line at the top. So you can see why people get confused. It's important to recognize the difference, especially when you're typing on a cell phone. You may write a word and to you and maybe to other beginners, it looks right, but to a more advanced Hebrew reader, it is very obvious. So I've had a couple of different Hebrew keyboards on my phone, and in all of them, the yod was with all of the other letters on the keyboard, whereas the geresh was on the symbol side of the keyboard. You have to press the symbol button and then it's there among all of the symbols. So here we have the letters with the geresh that I have seen. There might be others, but these are the only ones that I know. So in the middle column, we have the Hebrew, of course, and on the left, we have the typical transliteration for English speakers. And on the right, we have the IPA symbol. IPA is the International Phonetic Alphabet. The Gimel sounds like G, but the Gimel with the Geresh sounds like J. Dalit sounds like D, but Dalit with Geresh sounds like the. It's the voiced TH as in this or that. Zayin sounds like Z, but Zayin with Geresh sounds like J. It's like the sound in the middle of the word measure. Sadi sounds like Ts, like the TS at the end of the word cats. But Sadi with Geresh sounds like Ch, like a CH as in chip. And lastly, Taf sounds like T, although remember, without the Dagesh, Ashkenazis pronounce it like an S. But Taf with Geresh sounds like the voiceless TH sound. It's the sound at the beginning of think, the word think, or at the end of the word with. And these letters with a geresh are not all that common in Hebrew because, of course, they're only for foreign words, and so they're, you don't see them all that often. Another use for the single geresh is to denote that you're just saying the name of a letter. And so in Israel, when they are talking about what grade level a kid is in at school, they don't say first, second, third the way we do. They say, they use the letters. So they'll say a kid is in Kita Aleph. And when they write it like this, Kita and then Aleph with the gerish. And then lastly, they do use it the way we Americans do when it's a quote within a quote. And so bear with me here. I know this is a long sentence for beginners, but I'm going to explain it all. This sentence says, we say l'chaim before drinking wine, explained Sapir. So down here it says, Hizbira Sapir. Sapir is me. That's my Hebrew name. And Hizbira means explained. And here is what I explained. It's a direct quote. So we put quote marks around it. We put the double quote marks around it. And what I explained is, Omrim l'chaim lifnei lishtot yain, which means they say l'chaim before drinking wine. So everything I explained, my quote, is within these double quote marks. But what I said also has a quote. And so that quote is the word l'chaim, which is what everyone says before drinking wine. So that word goes within a single quote, which is written with a geresh in Hebrew. It's a quote within a quote. So this is just like American English. Here's my quote in English. They say l'chaim before drinking wine, explained Sapir. The double quote marks are around the whole big quote of everything that Sapir explained. And then the quote within the quote has the single quote mark. And this brings us to our second punctuation mark, which is the double quote mark, or gershayim in Hebrew. So they set off a direct quote, but they can also be seen in the middle of a word, or more specifically, just between the last letter and the second to last letter. And this indicates that there is some kind of acronym or initialism, such as in this word, sakum, which means silverware. And this word is an acronym from the initials of the three items that make up silverware: a knife, sakin, a spoon, kaf, and a fork, mazleg. The word for orange, the fruit, was formed in a similar way. There were no oranges in Israel in biblical times. So when modern Hebrew speakers needed a word for orange, they called it tapuach zahav, which means apple of gold. And then it got shortened to tapuz. And they left the gershaim to indicate that this is a portmanteau, a blend of two words. Eventually, the gershaim were dropped altogether, and tapuz became a full-fledged word of its own. I'm sure there are other uses for the single geresh and the gershaim, but I think these are the main uses. The most important thing to remember about them is that they are not Nikkud. When you are writing without Nikkud, you still need to use these. So that's it for today. Now you know all of the Nikkud and all of the other markings that are used in modern Hebrew. If you are a beginner, you can definitely start practicing reading and pronouncing the words, even if you don't know what they mean. So if you have any questions or feedback, please leave it in the comments and I will do my best to respond. And also, if you have some aspect of Hebrew grammar that has you flummoxed, let me know in the comments and I will do my best to make a video about it. Hit like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe and press the notification bell if you want to see more. On Thursday, I will upload a new book review, and then on Sunday, I will have another Hebrew vocab boost video. Or you can just wait for next week's grammar video, which will be on the few special spelling changes that are used to write modern Hebrew without Nikkud. Lehitraot b'pa'am haba'ah. See you next time.